All right, and we are live. Welcome to episode 254 of the 6G podcast. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 6G. We cover about six topics in 30 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Anshel, and joining me again today is fellow analyst Mike Dano from UCLA. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
I'm good. I just waved my daughter off on her 10-day car trip to California. She's headed out your way. She's 17, driving with her two friends. This is her big vacation. She's going by herself with her two friends, so I'm definitely not nervous. I have not been worrying all morning about it. It's totally fine. Everything's good. But I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited. We're doing our second pod of the week, and there's so much news that you know, uh, we are not for wanting on topics. Although I did plan on doing one of your topics, but then I saw it and I still found others. So I also nixed a couple as well. So there's plenty of things to talk about. So
What is going on
yeah,
with July? It's
and
supposed to be quiet right now. It's supposed to be the quiet summertime, but no, it's so
I,
busy.
I think everybody's trying to sneak stuff in before the 4th of July,
Yep,
um,
yep,
which seems to be coming up soon. I think a lot of people have tomorrow off, so I hope you have good plans to relax a little bit.
very
Um,
much. Same.
and I do too.
Good.
We'll see if I actually relax because of the little kids, but yeah, I'll get kicked off on my first topic, um, and that is that T-Mobile is forcing people from older plans to upgrade to new ones. Um, these are people who are on considerably older plans. Some people that go as far back as 10 or 15 years. I'm not one of those people, um, because I moved over to a newer plan a few years ago. But some people will see an increase of up to or increase of around $4 a line, which can be pretty painful for people who have four lines. T-Mobile has done a lot of those four-line deals, um, and yeah, it's kind of an unfortunate thing. Um, I think the reactions I've seen online have not been positive. A lot of people are like, I'm in front of the Verizon store right now, and it's like, okay, that's a bit of an overreaction, but I understand people don't like price increases, um, and I, I don't really quite understand why it's necessary. Um, they say it's for modernizing internal systems, um, but I think um, this might lead to some kind of what you call it, not organizational efficiency, but synergies, right? Whenever they talk about mergers, so I think maybe it helps with support, but in general, this just sounds like a way to to sugarcoat a price increase, especially for customers who have really old plans that might have been cheaper. Um, and yeah, I think AT&T and Verizon will capitalize on this, unfortunately for T-Mobile. But like, I just feel like the carriers in general are all moving in different directions. I didn't mention this actually; it's one of the topics I lopped off. But AT&T is actually expanding their whole like pay what you want, build a plan structure, and they're now adding fiber to that, so you can add fiber to your wireless plan and make it as cheap as possible, and only pay for what you need. So I think they're being a little bit innovative there with their plan structures, and then obviously Verizon, they've been very aggressive with pricing recently. So I think this is maybe a trend that T-Mobile may have to follow if they start to see net ads falter from this. But like realistically, I don't know if they'll do anything about this unless they see net ads affected.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was a few years ago we saw, a couple of the carriers, including Verizon, were slowly raising prices and instituted a number of price increases. And kind of in the early days of that effort, they did not suffer any customer losses, but they did reach a point where the price increases were enough and visible enough that they did start to lose customers. And so I think each carrier is kind of finding, how how much extra revenue can they get from these small price increases before they start to lose customers. And my reaction to this is that, the days when John Ledger was CEO of T-Mobile, he would have, if a competitor had done something like this, he would have jumped all over it, And so it's just those days when he was running T-Mobile were very unique. You just did not see CEOs acting like that, calling out competitors on social media, that kind of thing. And you really don't see that kind of behavior. I mean, it's a little bit different, obviously now, but yeah, the days of a John Ledger T-Mobile were pretty unique. It just makes me think about that time period and how T-Mobile behaved on the public stage then versus now. It's definitely different now. Yeah. So I'll pivot to mine. My first topic, and I've got just so much Spectrum stuff to talk about. Tons of Spectrum stuff lately. So the first Spectrum thing that I have to talk about is the next auction. You and I discussed the previous auction, the one that just concluded, auction 113, that raised $3.5 billion in total bids. Well, just a few days after the close of that auction, the FCC announced plans to vote on the rules for the next big auction. And this is a big one. This is the upper C-band. It's a total of 160 megahertz of mid-band spectrum nationwide. They're going to hold the auction next summer. So it's much earlier, I think, than expected. However, there's a real big caveat here in that the licenses are not going to be ready for commercial use until 2030. That's the big takeaway here. So they will conduct the auction. They'll know, we'll know who is going to bid on it and win it, next summer. So we'll have our answers as to who wants that spectrum. But the problem is that the people who win, whoever wins the spectrum next summer, they won't be able to actually turn it on until 2030 at the earliest. So they're going to release some of the licenses in 2030 and then some of them not until 2031. So It looks like, based on what we've talked about, 6G standards, early 6G prototypes, 6G specifications being released, it certainly looks to me like the upper C-band is a prime candidate for these early 6G networks, launching in the 2028 to 2030 timeframe. That's my takeaway from this.
Yeah, it also seems like this would be for a carrier who has deep pockets and can afford to not get their spectrum for like 4 years. It sounds like it might be a clearing issue, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like they're auctioning it before they clear it, or even close to clearing it.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, that seems kind of out of character and a little bit premature. Like, if you're buying the spectrum, you should be able to deploy it fairly soon. So buying spectrum and then having to wait 3 to 4 years to use it is kind of out of character from the FCC. So I'm a little curious as to why they're doing it this way. But either way, I think all the carriers will be interested, and maybe someone with extremely trillion-dollar deep pockets might be interested.
I think that's the big question. Is SpaceX going to participate in the upper C-band auction? And if so, how? I think that is a leading question for me, certainly. But you're right. There is no clear spectrum almost anywhere. So yeah, the upper C-band the incumbent users do need to be cleared out of the upper C-band before it can be used commercially, and that is the reason for this timeline. For sure. So it's the nature of the beast. There's just no clear spectrum anymore. You gotta repurpose whatever you want to use for 5G or 6G.
Speaking of beasts,
well done.
Verizon and BT have announced a joint venture for international enterprise services, communications, and business in general. So they're combining both of their international operations businesses into a 50-50 joint venture. They say this joint venture will serve 3,000 customers, obviously enterprises, across 180 countries, uh, representing about $4 billion in revenue. So this is not a small JV. I see you're also a Coke Zero enjoyer. Um, the combination of this international networking business also kind of allows them to focus on their domestic businesses, because BT is mostly a British telecom company and Verizon is a mostly American telecom company. So both of them are kind of like letting their international businesses go off and become friends, is the way I put it. And yeah, this sounds like a way to also serve enterprises better, because now BT and Verizon can unify their international assets and offer international network and roaming and all kinds of um, enterprise scale global business kind of services that otherwise they would have to dedicate resources to satisfy those customers. And you know both of them are still going to make profit off of this business, and they're by joining them together they're creating more scale for this kind of business and allowing their enterprise customers who have global operations to deal potentially have access to more resources, and address more markets, because 180 countries is actually a lot. It's almost all of them. I think the official count's a little over 200, and I think that this will probably make it easier for larger enterprises to offer take on different types of connectivity services. And it seems like they're talking a little bit about AI, but um, I didn't get any real concrete um, explanation for what the AI component of this was. But obviously, every global telecom company that offers some kind of AI services is going to have um, some kind of security features and things like that. But it is just interesting because BT and Verizon are both very big, and I've never recalled the either two of them working together on anything. So um, that's an interesting development, and I think it will, maybe eventually it'll be renamed into something that has its own name, which happens with these kinds of things.
Yeah, yeah, I think right. Yeah, certainly. I think you're right in terms of scale. Right, scale is a key element in international telecom, and so if you can combine Verizon and BT, obviously more scale. And I think you're right. I think the next thing I would be looking for this is to see what its go-to-market strategy is, who they're going to pick to lead it, what the name is, what the overall strategy is, what their AI story is going to be. I think that's the next step for this business, is to see exactly what they're going to do next. Yeah.
They do officially have a CEO designate,
Ah.
and his name is Martin Blanken.
Hmm.
I don't know him, but he sounds Dutch. Um, and they said the transaction expected to be completed in 2027, subject to regulatory clearances. So obviously, this is a kind of a merger of two different divisions from two different companies. So and one of them is a European company, although it's not EU, but I'm sure they have EU assets. So there's going to be some European oversight as well.
Right. Speaking of M&A, we've got another good one to talk about. Really, I would say the most surprising news announcement this week, this month, possibly even this year. We had a company named Rocketlabs announced an $8 billion acquisition of Iridium, the longtime satellite operator. And the real interesting part here is that Rocketlabs is essentially a SpaceX competitor. They build, they're in aerospace, they build rockets and launch rockets. And so now they've acquired a satellite operator. And within the announcement, when they announced it earlier this week, they made heavy emphasis on Iridium's L-band spectrum. That's the spectrum that Iridium had intended to devote to direct-to-device services. So, well, essentially what this acquisition does, the Rocketlabs acquisition of Iridium, is that it creates, it's yet another in a series of sort of mergers and acquisitions in the D2D sector. So we had SpaceX acquire EchoStar's spectrum, we had Amazon acquire Globalstar, and now we've got Rocketlabs acquiring Iridium, and all of them have been talking about, participating real heavily in the D2D industry. So it's another example of the the global telecom industry and the global space industry just colliding, just in big, gigantic, explosive crashes of collisions. It's been a real interesting thing to watch. So I don't know much about Rocket Lab. I'm very excited to see what happens next, what their plan is, and I think that really, we can probably expect yet another D2D constellation. I mean, I think that may be the next piece of this puzzle that we'll hear from them.
Yeah. So the good thing is I'm very familiar with Rocket Lab.
Oh,
um, because I've been following the rocket space for quite some time, and Rocket Lab was always a very small player, and they've always just been working on getting themselves as an alternative to SpaceX, and they were, I think at some point I even owned Rocket Lab stock. I don't own any stocks now, but um, Rocket Lab I really saw as a hedge to SpaceX. And if you look at their stock, they were like a $4 stock 4 years ago. Now they're $100 stock. So
wow.
they have a $60 billion market cap. So they could literally do this transaction with stock mostly. Um, and their share price is at like $100 right now. But they're profitable. Um, and I saw this when I saw this news. It was a little bit surprising, but not shocking because it follows the SpaceX model of sending rockets up and then also sending your own payloads up as well. And now Iridium won't have, Rocket Lab will have, its own satellites to put up in there, and it can do it at much lower cost than if they were to pay someone else, and that can give them the scale that they need to potentially compete with SpaceX, especially now with Amazon Leo. Because now, guess what? Amazon Leo, they have their own launch partner, right? So it's like everybody wants to have the payload and the delivery system. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and you know, I think the moving parts that have been happening the last 6 months have been crazy. But at the same time, to your point, like that, what I think a lot of people said with this was like this just further validates the whole spectrum debate, and that spectrum is really important in satellite and for D2D. And I think we're going to see a lot more people bidding on spectrum, and I think we're also going to see these satellites companies push more into the 3GPP standard to get satellite to be more prominent in the debate around 6G.
Yeah, and I know this dovetails into your last topic too, but do you know what the Rocket Lab launch capability is? Is it pretty mature, or are they still sort of early days in the Rocket Lab? Like, how many rockets do they have? Are they reusable? Are they launching a lot of them, or are they still developing launch technology? I know, Blue Origin has suffered some setbacks, but is trying to make progress. And so I actually don't know anything about Rocket Labs in terms of their launch capability.
Yeah, so they have two platforms. They have Electron and Neutron, and Electron is their reusable rocket. They also have, just like SpaceX and a bunch of other companies, they've got spacecraft, optical systems, radios, software, solar composite structure. So like they started out kind of more as a manufacturing like know-how, and then they actually started sending up payloads, and now they are going to deliver their own payloads. So I think it's kind of like an evolution of the Rocket Lab business, but they do have a smaller rocket. It's not a Falcon Heavy or Starship, right? So they may not always compete for the same business as SpaceX, but you know, they, I also don't think they'll probably be sending up something like an AST Space Mobile Bluebird, right? But there are going to be plenty of payloads that still need to go up, and they could also build bigger rockets down the road as their business matures.
Yeah. Interesting. Vertical integration. That's the name of the game right now.
I think they even claimed that their Electron platform was the world's first reusable orbital small rocket. Um, so I don't know what a small rocket means, but they said the rocket itself is 60 feet. So and it has a 320 kilo payload. So it's not a very big rocket in general, but I remember them being around for quite some time as I've been paying attention to the space.
Certainly bigger than what we're going to set off this 4th of July.
Yes,
Probably just a little bit bigger.
definitely. All right, so
yeah.
I'll do that'll wind us into my third topic.
Yeah.
And this was one that I saw happen in real time, and that was a rumor that has bubbled up again that SpaceX is making an AI device with a proprietary operating system, and that it's a handheld thinner than an iPhone. But Elon says that it's utterly false. What's interesting is this was from the Wall Street Journal, so it's not just like some little rag that's made things up to get clicks. I have a feeling they vetted this story, and that this early prototype was shown to some investors, and that this was a combination of some XAI capabilities with some Snapdragon chipset from Qualcomm, and that it uses a lot of the XAI capabilities, and that's really what the point of it is. And when Reuters reported this earlier, I didn't really think it was that big of a deal. I also didn't think it was really real, but he also said it wasn't out of the question. So I think that as this rumor has matured, I'm actually more inclined to believe that it's real, especially when I consider that companies like OpenAI are doing stuff like this. And I think XAI and SpaceX desperately want to compete with the likes of Anthropic and OpenAI. So I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
I mean, it makes, it doesn't, if they are making a device, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're making a mass market device that they hope to sell in the billions, or even in the millions, right? So, assume that they have a prototype device that SpaceX does. Maybe they launch it and they sell, a few 100,000 models of it. The noise around that device may be their goal, right? It's like, it would be enough to have enough people talking about them, and maybe it generates sales of Starlink services or, whatever the Starlink mobile service comes out as. I'm wondering if there's not necessarily a plan to sell a lot of devices, but more of a way of generating interest in other products from the company. I kind of wonder if that's what these rumors are really hinting at.
It could also be like a stock pump, although they already IPO'd, right?
Yeah, exactly. But right, it was during the roadshow, so I mean, hard to know what's going to really turn into a real product and what's just a rumor, innuendo, and sort of speculation.
Maybe that's also how they launch their service for using their own spectrum, which I think can lead us to your next topic.
Why, that's a great point. I know. Speaking of spectrum, yeah, this is my last topic. Gets a little bit into the weeds because it does get fairly complicated. But the upshot here is that spectrum remains a very valuable resource, and pretty soon we've got a pretty good chunk of spectrum that will be available for direct-to-device services pretty soon. So what has happened is the FCC has granted Grain Management's request that Grain is able to use its 800 megahertz, its new 800 megahertz spectrum for direct-to-device services. And so there's a long back history here. So this sliver of 800 megahertz is worth about $3.5 billion. It was divested from T-Mobile as part of T-Mobile's purchase of Sprint, and the intent was for Dish Network, EchoStar to buy that sliver of spectrum. And Dish had built its network when Dish was still operating its network. It had designed its network with the intention of buying that spectrum and being able to use it. Dish had the option to buy it, didn't have the money for it, said, no, I'm not going to buy it. So it essentially reverted back to T-Mobile. T-Mobile was still required to divest it. It agreed to divest it to a management company called Grain Management. Initial thought that Grain Management was going to use that spectrum for utility operations, kind of like a company called Anterix. However, in the past few months, Grain has pivoted, and now what Grain Management wants to do is essentially lease that block of 800 megahertz spectrum to a direct-to-device company. And so what's going to happen next? So the FCC has approved all these plans. What's going to happen next is that Grain is going to hold its own auction, private auction process to lease the spectrum to any company that is interested in leasing it. Now, here's the interesting innuendo part of it, is that right before the FCC approved this waiver to allow the spectrum to be used for D2D, who shows up but AST Space Mobile? So the day before that the FCC approved this, AST Space Mobile went to the FCC and said, we support this plan by Grain Management. And so I think the assumption here is that AST Space Mobile will be one of the companies that will participate in the auction process by Grain Management, and is essentially interested in leasing this 800 megahertz chunk of 800 nationwide 800 megahertz spectrum from Grain, so that AST Space Mobile can use it in its planned D2D service. And as we know, the more spectrum that you can deploy for your wireless network, the better your services are. That's just a fact of wireless spectrum, is the more spectrum you got, the better it's going to be. So if AST Space Mobile wants to have a pretty good service, a pretty good direct-to-device service, the addition of this Grain Management 800 megahertz spectrum would benefit AST Space Mobile. However, we don't know if AST Space Mobile is going to be the only bidder. Maybe suddenly Rocketlabs is in the game. Maybe Rocketlabs is going to participate in the auction process. Maybe SpaceX is going to participate in the auction process. We just don't know. What we will do is we'll find out the result of Grain Management's auction process in early November. November 5th is when they are required, according to FCC rules, to alert the FCC as to the result of this this private auction process. So so much news on the D2D front. Here's more news on the D2D front. It's just again, this is a reflection of the collision between the telecom industry and the space industry, and boy, this collision is just it's unearthing all kinds of interesting developments and relationships.
It's certainly keeping us busy.
It definitely is. I actually read the FCC order that just came out this week, and it is quite lengthy and very detailed. So yeah, it's definitely keeping me busy.
So I had a question for you, because I didn't know the details of this spectrum. I didn't realize this was a private spectrum auction. So do they have to follow any of the FCC rules? Like, do they just decide what their bidding process is, or do they have to follow how the FCC does things? Like,
no, I call it an auction process, but really what the FCC told Grain was, you are allowed to lease this spectrum to somebody else. And you have to do that quickly, because the FCC's goal is to make sure that spectrum is used. And so what they don't want is for Grain to sit on it for 5 years and not do anything with it.
Sure.
So the FCC rules are designed to make sure that spectrum is used. And so Grain is saying, we'll definitely use it. What we'll do to use it is lease it out to somebody who is going to put it to use. Grain Management doesn't have any satellites, right? They don't have a business plan for D2D, but they know, everybody knows there's plenty of companies that do. And so Grain is saying to the FCC, we want to buy this spectrum. We want to lease it. Spectrum leasing is a thing. T-Mobile actually currently leases 600 megahertz from Grain Management. And part of this deal means that T-Mobile actually will own that 600 megahertz. So spectrum leasing is a thing for sure. There's many examples of that. But yeah, the idea here is just to put the spectrum to use quickly. And so now it is up to Grain to find a company that's interested and willing to pay to lease the spectrum in order to put it to use for D2D. And it actually, because it's so right now that spectrum is primarily intended for terrestrial use. So you do have to have a waiver from the FCC to use it in a D2D scenario. That's non-terrestrial rated space. So you have to get FCC permission in order to operate a network, a D2D network, because it's different than a terrestrial network. So anyway, they got what they wanted from the FCC, and now they can move ahead with this plan to lease it.
Okay. Yeah, because it seems very interesting that we're in a place where, this spectrum was part of a separate deal, and now it's becoming a part of a new deal. But yeah, I really don't know who's going to use it or how it's going to be bid on. But it does sound very exciting that we've got, more spectrum coming to everybody. And most likely, I think the price will probably go up because spectrum is so valuable now. And it's a shame for Dish that they were never able to use a spectrum because they were too broke to buy it. But if they had and still ran out of money, then it would have ended up in SpaceX's hands anyway. So, who knows where we'll end up with this. But I really appreciate you catching wind of this and informing our viewers and listeners because, a lot's going on and there's a lot of interested parties and a lot of money being thrown at this problem right now. So, I think Amazon also might even be a potential bidder in this space. So, yeah, I really appreciate it. And I think that wraps us up for the week. We will definitely have a nice 4th of July weekend. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. And please tune in again next week when we hopefully have even more news than we did this week. And everybody's rested from the 4th of July holiday. And please don't forget to rate us and subscribe.